Hello, BookTube, and welcome to my science fiction series of videos. And as it was last week, this is devoted to New Worlds November, and this week's theme is robots and AI. So I'm going to do a very broad and brief, or attempt to, introduction to robots and a little bit of AI because they do go together. And again, this will be just a very general, broad swipes of describing thing, highlighting a few stories here and there, as well as uh, it's only going to go up to probably 70s pretty well because that's where my knowledge of science fiction sort of peters out as it gets to uh, the present day. But yeah, like as what most people think of as a robot, thinking walking machine, as in science fiction, is relatively recent. It's developed during the 30s and 40s, that type of robot. But its antecedents go way back to something called Automata. These were generally mechanical, clockwork type uh, things, and they were sometimes animals and people. Ancient Egyptians had sort of a view of something that they would. They have a myth that they could, create, have inanimate objects move and do bidding, and they were endowed or could be endowed with a soul, a ka, in ancient Egypt. And in Greece too, they used mercury. So the stories go to bring life to statues, and they also had automata, like these clocks, kind of clockwork mechanisms for things that moved. And uh, there was something that was discovered in the early few years of the 20th century, Antikythera mechanism, and it was I think it was the name of the island where it was found off of underwater. And it's a very, very intricate clockwork system that actually showed how planets and stars, and I don't know that much about it, but it's like very, very intricate work, and that's around 150, 100 BC, and then up through into medieval times. There were automata. They had uh, they would be people. They could play chess, and they had specific tasks. And even for clocks, they would come out and do ring at certain times. So it's all clockwork. They are the precursors of robots in a sense, but they don't have consciousness. And but there were stories that started being written about them, and even before that, like there's the golem in the Jewish tradition, that is an inanimate being that's brought to life by a scroll by magic, basically. And it's made of clay, and it would do its master's bidding. And in China, they had similar types of things. Like everywhere, pretty well, they had these, but they really developed big in the 18th century, and there'd be chess. They would draw, and they would do certain tasks, and then writers began to write about them. E.T.A. Hoffman in 1814 wrote story Automata, and then in 1816 The Sandman, and others too. But it sort of showed these going amok, and destroying people. There's even Edgar Allan Poe has written stories of Automata, chess. I can't remember the name of it, something with chess player or something like that. And if you even want to go a little further and look at Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is in a sense, well, it's a created being. So and it's began what Isaac Asimov called the Frankenstein complex, where the fear of technology, the fear of machines, and that they will take over, and that sort of led right into sort of the Luddites. But throughout all history, any technology, any new technology as it began, there was a fear of people, of that technology, that it's going to destroy society and so forth. Um, but yeah, and there was even, like, during the 1800s in American dime novels. There was the Steam Man of the Prairies, and that's in the 1860s. Edward F. Ellis. Sorry, I'm glancing at notes here for dates and so forth. Edward F. Ellis wrote a whole series of these, and then later Harry Eaton wrote Frank Reed and his Steam Men of the Plains, and that's in the 1870s. But again, they had no brains, they had nothing like that. And there was even, it slowly developed that these beings could have sort of some kind of intelligence or consciousness, but it was a very slow burn for this. And the word robot we get from Karl Capek's RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots. It was a play. He was Czech, and he wrote the play in, I've got here, in 1921, and it was translated in 1923 into English. This is an Oxford University Press of the play, and another play by his brother, Joseph. And they were flesh and blood. And robot is more or less Czech word for worker. And I think Rossum's is a process, I think, is the word for process. But again, there sort of has this, what Asimov called the Frankenstein complex, where they would turn on their creator, like Frankenstein and most of the others that had any kind of intelligence to a certain extent. And then but that's where they got the name. But however, those were flesh and blood, so it took a while. But for some reason, robots were taken to be the mechanical, and then I think it was Jack Williamson in the early 30s. He had a story that he called the Cometeers, and and in there he called the flesh and blood ones, or ones that looked very human, that you could not distinguish by looks, as androids. So then it became robots were the mechanical looking, and androids were the human looking. And like I say, it gets kind of messy there eventually, because you've got like Philip K. Dick with his Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the replicants that are flesh and blood, and others got in on that too. So that's why I say you could, in a sense, call Frankenstein's monster, an android. In a sense, it's a precursor to that. It's stretching it, I know, but it's sort of is an antecedent. And for intelligent, like computers, like they go hand in hand, because artificial intelligence, it was something that was sort of a later sort of term that people use. I'm not sure. I think it was in the 50s that it was started, and one of the earliest proponents in real life in science is what's his first name here? Sorry, Norbert Weiner. He was the father of cybernetics, and it's a science of communication within sort of living things and in machines, and that gets to sort of artificial intelligence. He's sort of considered the father of artificial intelligence and a lot of times computers. Now, he was teaching at MIT, and in 1929, the 19-year-old John W. Campbell was a student at MIT, and he wrote his first story in 1929, and then in when was this, 1930, he wrote a story called When the Atoms Failed, and it's considered by many um, the first, sort of looking back on it, first actual computer that actually was described what computers became to be, which the nobody really in the real world talked about computers much until the 1940s. You get Turing and the machine, but then you even can go back to the Victorian period, where I forget his name, but there was a big machine. It was never made, but they actually made it, and it was like a calculating type machine. I forget his name now, but these are all precursors in real life for this. But in science fiction, John W. Campbell was one of the first to write what became sort of a thinking machine, a computer. Now, with all this together, with what we call artificial intelligence, uh, robots began to have, self awareness. In stories, they still sort of were the brainless type in some of the fiction and in the serials, like the Phantom Menace is a serial with Bela Lugosi. I think, yeah, Bela Lugosi's in that, and they're just and a lot of the serials during the 30s, they were basically like the Steam Man of the Prairies. They were just, you wind them up and let them go, and that's the way it was. And then, but in the 30s, you started getting actual robots that thought and were conscious in many ways. And I'm going to be reading a story or rereading a story by Eando Binder, which is called I, Robot. It predates Isaac Asimov's I, Robot. And it was a series as well. But there were a lot of robot stories, and and it was really Asimov who took this and ran with it in a sense, but it was with the help of John W. Campbell. And John W. Campbell basically he liked robot stories because he wrote stuff about robots and computers before he became editor, but he insisted that the writers think about the implications of having a robot or artificial intelligence, which he wouldn't have used at that time, but in society and how that affects society, and think about it. And between him and Isaac Asimov says it was him that came up with the three laws of robotics, which I'll just read them quickly here because they are sort of a linchpin of robots in science fiction. The first law is a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Law number 2, a robot must obey orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And law 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Now, he modified those, and he had, a fourth law, in a sense, the zeroth law, but that's sort of something he developed later. But he says John W. Campbell put this created these laws. But Campbell says that these were implicit in his stories already, and they were implicit there, but he just made it explicit. And they're just sort of logical things. They're sort of things that humans would follow as well. um, and then he worked on those, and the stories that he wrote were sort of, well, how do these laws actually come into effect, and how does it affect the robot and then the people around it when the robot is given certain orders. What will it do? And that's how he took it. And there was reaction against it. Lester Del Rey didn't sort of like the three laws of robotics. He thought it was like an enslavement, that they shouldn't be there, because it's like, if you got an intelligent robot, it'll be sort of like humans in a sense, and they will be nobler and better even than humans. And like, there's Clifford Simak as well, who wrote a lot of robot stories. His sort of he it's implicit that this kind of thing is there, but they're very human like, the robots. They're very noble. They're loyal to themselves and to itself, and to humans, or later other animals. And that's, it comes to fruition in City, where Jenkins is, he's sort of like a butler in a sense of the Webster family. But as humans and the Websters disappear, he takes over, sort of the guiding of the animals and species that inherit the earth in a sense. And he lives for, well, he's still alive at the end of all the stories, but he's like 7, 10,000 years old. There's no specific age to him, so he's very old. And Asimov Asimov did this as well, having robots that were very old, and the implication of that, and how to work. And in Bicentennial Man, he wanted to become human. It's like Pinocchio, wanting to be a real boy. There was that dream of being human. And it's all like, how does this affect society? How does this affect the robot? And that was his view, was that robots will be helpful, will be useful, will help continue the human race into space and so forth, and free up mundane tasks. And that was his view. As I say, Simak took a slightly different thing. He made them very noble, and it made them endowed with everything that a human should be, in a sense. Not always, but to a large extent, of what they should be. And even going back to this Herbert Norbert Weiner, he actually even tried writing some science fiction as well, and he wrote. I've never read anything, but I've come across that, and it'd be interesting to see. I kind of doubt they'd be any good, but you never know. But yeah, all this is um, like the um, artificial intelligence is implicit in the early robots, in a sense, because they do develop into very consciousness, in a sense, because there's even, I did the story How To, I reread of Simak, and I talked about it yesterday, where it's humorous, but it brings in sort of the civil rights time, because it was written in the 50s. So it's again where science fiction can talk about issues that aren't sort of palatable at the time to be talked about, but you put it as an alien or a robot, it's acceptable. But you're saying the same thing, and sometimes it's heavy-handed, yes, but in this case, in the story, the robots get rights, They get civil rights for the robots because they are conscious and they think, and they have rights. And he doesn't go into what that means for society. He leaves it sort of hanging and realizing, like, oh boy, the robots are actually going to provide everything for humans, and humans don't have to do anything. Or at least for the main character, Knight. I called him Jenkins yesterday, but it's Knight. Is the character, and also too, like, artificial intelligence in another story called Lulu, which I'm hoping to get to reread as well. It's a spaceship that it's an artificial intelligence, and it's a female persona for the computer. And one of the characters, if I remember the story right, that they feed it a lot of romance novels and that, and the computer falls in love with her crew and doesn't want to leave them, and does certain things throughout the story. And it's a humorous story, but also, at the questioning of, well, what happens to, can a robot, can an artificial intelligence fall in love? And there's been a lot of stories with that as well. Let me see here. Yeah, it's just and the thing is, the robots have sort of fallen by the wayside. Well, I think they're still in science fiction, but they sort of science fiction missed the boat there a little bit, because robots didn't happen the way they did, but the artificial intelligence is happening, and computers have taken off. But again, they were dealt with slightly in the 30s, and then it was in the 40s, and Asimov again wrote about computers, and I think every science fiction since then has had computers of some sort in it, but I always go back to a lot of science fiction that it's of the time, in a sense, because for the technology. It's like I'm going back to Clifford Simak, because I'm quite familiar with his stuff. In The Ring Around the Sun, there's a mouse or a rat that's a spying rat. It's a mechanical rat, and the guy the character throws something at the rat, and he hears tubes bursting. Yeah, because tubes were, but they were tiny tubes. There was no such thing as transistors, and transistors are even obsolete. So and sort of science fiction sometimes is a step ahead, but sometimes it's a product of the time, because you've also got to, like, you describe something. If something was described in the 50s, a silicon chip, people wouldn't know what that is. So you try to make something that is familiar for people to grasp onto, because sometimes if everything is unfamiliar, it will fail to a certain extent. The story will fail. So sometimes the technology doesn't work, but you've got a robot, and it's got intelligence, and it's got it. Well, that's the other. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, might have a soul in what is called a soul, but uh, in How To by Clifford Simak, he asks the question of, or the court does, well, how can they be alive if they don't have a soul and they don't believe in God? And the answer was, well, there's a lot of humans that don't believe in God and don't believe they have a soul. So are they not human? Are they not, are they not have the benefits of full rights in society? So he's talking about that, and then we get into other religion as well, that Simak continued, and is like Project Pope. It's a future where humans more or less have gotten away from and forgotten about religion, but they robots took over the church, and this is Project Pope. and they're trying to find the best religion, and for thousands of years on this planet. And this runs through other stories of Simak, where you've got robots that become religious, where humans have left this, and other writers have done this as well. So it's very relevant to today, especially the artificial intelligence. Is very relevant because it is being developed. It's not even close to actually be an actual intelligence, but it's getting there. It's more just a very, very sophisticated computers at this point. And it can make some decisions based on its programming. But the full artificial intelligence, the way robots are, in a lot of the science fiction, is they've gone beyond their programming. They can make decisions based on things that they don't have, and things like the contradictions of words, or the ambiguity of words, won't affect it. And it's still like computers, and that's where Isaac Asimov showed this, that computers weren't good at ambiguity, and robots at times. And he talks about that, because there's the famous thing of just the what, 4 words: Mary had a little lamb. What does that mean? Humans know what it means based on the story. But if you said that to, a logical computer, well, what does it mean? She had a baby, a lamb, you know, swindled it, had it, sexually had it, all sorts of permeations of what this could mean. And that's where, like, Asimov has looked at this, and other writers, of how that can be interpreted, and then the effects of that interpretation. And so that in some ways makes it relevant for today. But anyway, that is a very, very broad view of robots more than AI, but they are sort of connected, because of the robots are, if robots are depicted as autonomous, and thinking, and have a consciousness, then obviously that is an artificial intelligence, whether it be mechanical, as in Isaac Asimov's positronic brain, or flesh and blood, biological, like in the replicants, or even going back to Frankenstein, or a combination of both, like a cybernetic type thing, a cyborg, I should say, a cyborg type thing, where, because in some of Simac's stuff, and in the how to that I just read yesterday, there's a biological aspect. He doesn't tell exactly what it is, but there's a biological aspect to the robot. And a lot of writers will get around that so it's not pure artificial, because it's the biological aspect that creates the consciousness and the self-awareness, rather than the pure positronic brain, as Asimov had done. But it's a fascinating subject. There is so much written about robots and AI, and its impact on society, past and present, and future. So it's a very rich subject. It's like, aliens is a big thing in science fiction, which you did last week, and robots is a huge thing, and AI. And anyway, that's where I'll end it there, because it's sort of taking you up to sort of the prehistory of robots and AI, and sort of not recent history, but 40, 50 years and further back, of where it developed from. And next week will be time travel. Yeah, time travel. And I hope to do the same, is to do a little spiel about time travel. But anyway, I hope everybody's doing well, and what are your robot books that you're reading, or short stories that you're reading for New Worlds November? Or even if you're not, do you like robots in stories? What type of robot do you like? That type of thing. I'd love to hear, because there's everything. There's the menacing evil robots to the sexy robots. So there's everything under the sun for robots. Anyway, take care, Bucktube, and I'll see you next time.